What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Dying Light 2. Now, what I normally do is review games after 100%, and it's my understanding that 100% for this game is apparently supposed to take a little while. That said, I did do a review after 100% for the original Dying Light, so it's only natural that I do the sequel as well. And with it being launch day, what better time to share some first impressions? And because reviewing games after 100% takes so long, usually I'll release these first impressions videos just to share some general thoughts before I actually play through the entire thing, do the review, etc. But with no further ado, let's actually jump into this a little bit here. Right off the bat, couple spoilers for the first game if you haven't played it yet, but weird decision if you haven't. The game pretty much immediately tells you about what happened after the events of the first game, which has been the subject of some debate. And I'm a little surprised with the way they went for it. That is to say, they kind of just did both, meaning that Haran was supposed to have either been wiped out or the virus escaped somehow. And they kind of did both of those things, actually, which I thought was an interesting decision. So I'm kind of curious to see where the story of this game is going to go. But beyond that, they've condensed some of the skill trees, which is probably for the best. So instead of having like survivor rank, combat, agility, legend, and then all the individual DLC skill trees, for this one, we just have combat and parkour, which personally I think makes it a bit more simple, which is always nice. But with that simplification, the game itself seems to be a little more focused on being an RPG this time around, whereas the previous title felt more like a survival game with RPG elements. Dying Light 2 seems to be putting a big focus on the RPG aspect of it all and kind of working that into the framework of the original game. And so far, I'm enjoying that quite a bit. I'm curious to see just how far they take that exactly. And in terms of some of the other changes from the original, the game strikes a much more somber tone with a slower opening. The first game kind of threw you into the action immediately, everything was guns blazing type of stuff. This one is much more of a slower build. They are explaining a lot of the things that happened, how things work in this world, etc. Much more of an introduction than the first game, I would say, albeit at a bit of a slower pace. Beyond that, things like the crafting menu got a bit of a UI update, which is probably for the best. The crafting menu in the first game got incredibly long after a while, to the point where it was kind of hard to sort through all of it with all the recipes and things you had learned. Whereas here, we get recipes and then they become upgradable later, seems to be the gist of it. And at least so far, there seems to be a much greater emphasis on fighting other human beings as opposed to the zombies themselves. Not to say that the zombies aren't important, but so far I have fought a lot more people than I have zombies. Something worth noting there, I suppose. But to kind of wrap some of those thoughts up without going, too in-depth here and making this super long. Overall, I'm enjoying my experience so far, and it largely seems to come down to a few directional changes within the same framework of the original game. Because if you've played Dying Light, this definitely feels like more of Dying Light. However, there's again a bit of a switch in focus to this kind of RPG thing. You can see levels above enemies, you can actually equip different types of gear beyond just what weapons you're using. And while the game definitely feels like Dying Light, it at the same time definitely feels like they took this in a bit of a different direction and tried to focus more on those RPG roots. That would, broadly speaking, be my first impressions of the game. That said, it does feel very good to play. And I'm very curious to see where they're going to take this, because the transition from the story in terms of the first to the second game, again, they pretty much did everything that I thought this game might revolve around in terms of what was going on with the virus. So I'm kind of curious to see where this is going to go from here, actually. But overall, again, having a good time. Definitely a bit different from the first game for sure, but I'm mostly intrigued by it more than anything else. And I'm looking forward to tearing through this one, though admittedly it might take a while, so I wouldn't expect the review after 100% on this one for a little bit, though I might do some guides and stuff in the meantime. Regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.